Good afternoon. Welcome to Who Counts as What? Promise Intentions of International and Domestic Diversity, part of the Office for Equity and Diversity's Critical Conversation Series. I'm Ann Phibbs, Director of Education for the Office for Equity and Diversity. Gesundheit. The Critical Conversations about Diversity and Justice series is co-sponsored by the University Libraries. My colleague in the back, Jody Gray, the University librarian, who works on diversity issues, is responsible for creating a list of further academic resources on each of our Critical Conversation web topics, which you can link to on our Critical Conversations webpage. This is our second year of offering this series, and we're excited to offer live streaming so that you can watch via our website in real time or at a later date, since they will be archived again on the Critical Conversations website. And then we've also added an opportunity for you to provide feedback on this series. So if you signed in, we will send you an email with an online evaluation, a link to an online evaluation form, or you can also access that on our Critical Conversations webpage. I want you to also note that the last conversation for this academic year is coming up on May 9th, when we offer One Nation or Many Nations in One, Racism, Romanticism, and American Indian Issues Today. This was our session which was scheduled for February, but which we've rescheduled. So again, that will be May 9th. And as with all of our conversations, we'll start with some discussion among our panelists and moderator, and then move out into a Q&A with the audience. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, my colleague in the Office for Equity and Diversity, Anitra Cottledge. Anitra earned her master's degree from the University of Minnesota in Educational Policy and Administration, with a research focus on women of color in higher education administrative leadership. Anitra is also an instructor in the university's leadership minor. Her research and professional interests include leadership, race, women of color feminisms, vocation career pathways, digital divides, and uses of social media in social justice movements. Before joining the Office for Equity and Diversity Central Office in this past November as Director of Communications, Anitra was the Assistant Director of the Women's Center for several years, where she coordinated leadership development initiatives and educational workshops for undergraduate and graduate students, as well as Women's Center's communication and outreach. Her writing has appeared in the anthology Click, When We Knew We Were Feminists, and she currently sits on the board of directors for Ananya Dance Theater, a Twin Cities-based contemporary dance company. You can see she's very busy. We're lucky that we have her today. Please welcome Anitra Cottledge.
Good afternoon. I'm not really all that busy, but doesn't everybody make themselves sound busy in their bios? Isn't that kind of the point? Thank you all for being here, and good afternoon. Before we begin, I just want to thank Ann, and I don't know if Claire is here. Claire's in the back. Claire Walter Marchetti. They both put together these really awesome series. This is the second year, as Ann said. I was telling Ann just a few minutes ago that one of the things I think is great about this series is that sometimes we get some of the same people that come to multiple conversations, and then we also get new people that we haven't seen to every conversation. So I think that's a real benefit to this series. So I'm going to introduce our four panelists in no particular order. They're on an order in my page that they're not sitting in. But I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll start off with a few questions for them, and then we'll again open it up for audience discussion. Our first panelist is Jesus Estrada Perez, who's sitting way on my left. He's a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies, a graduate instructor in the Department of Writing Studies, and a writing consultant at the Center for Writing. He's really busy. His research focuses on the ways men of color in general, and gay Chicano men in particular, use art to imagine alternative queer formations of race and sexuality as a form of survival and social critique. His current and past activist work has focused on social and cultural issues concerning people of color, queer people, and queer people of color in the United States. Our second panelist is Greta Friedman Sanchez, and a native of Colombia. She's an associate professor in international development in the global policy area at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. She's an economic and medical anthropologist interested in women's empowerment and gender equity. Her research aims to understand how and why gender equity or inequity is generated inside of homes through the interlacing of family bargaining dynamics, policy, and cultural norms. Dr. Friedman Sanchez's research unravels the complex web of intra-household relationships through 4 strands of scholarship: paid labor, property ownership, domestic violence, and unpaid caregiving labor. Our third panelist is Ying Iverson. Ying currently serves as the Professional Development Director at the University of Minnesota Extension. In her role, Ying works closely with leadership at Extension and its centers, as well as Central University offices, to collaboratively develop and implement a comprehensive internal professional development and training framework across important common topics. Ying has a master's degree in comparative and international development education and a PhD in human resource development from the University of Minnesota. She has worked at the City of St. Paul as a human resource consultant, the Minnesota Judicial Branch as an education and organization development program specialist, and as an independent change management consultant. The past roles provided Ying experiences focusing on organization development, change management, leadership alignment, and diversity and inclusion. Our last panelist is Grace Motoki. She's an advisor and counselor for international students and scholars at International Student and Scholar Services, or ISSS. She coordinates the ISSS cross-cultural discussion group program and assists with new international student orientation program. She has a BA in education from her home country of Kenya and an MA in counseling student personnel program from the University of Minnesota. Prior to coming to the U.S., Grace worked for 3 years as a program coordinator for Minnesota Studies International Development, a U of M study abroad program. Since joining ISSS in 2007, Grace has had a wonderful opportunity of being able to engage with colleagues and clientele from many countries, disciplines, and diverse cultures every day. She is very grateful for the opportunity. And we're very grateful that all of them could be here with us today, so thank you all. I'm going to offer the first question to the panel, which is, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience with the topic that we have today. So maybe talk about your work with international students or populations, and or your work with domestic students and populations, and why you feel this topic is important. And we can start with anyone. Do you want me to pick on you, Ying? Well, you were looking at me.
Well, I'm just a rule follower, so I'm just like,
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Happy Friday. So, my experience about this topic, first of all, I just realized I'm the only one didn't mention where I'm originally come from. So I'm originally come from China, and I came here 2001 and pursued my master's degree and then PhD degree at the U. And then just happened to fall in love with a Norwegian. So then, you can imagine the two cultures together. And then just after a while, and then I got a job back to the U. So I'm very happy to be back here. So the experience with this topic, I think, is a twofold. One fold is that I was an international student most of the time in the 4 or 5 years I'm here. And so I have the first-hand experience as a university campus with the support system, with the academic, environment, all those things. And then the second fold of my experience is now my previous roles, as I mentioned, that it's mainly really a lot of times is a focus on domestic diverse populations. So my diversity and inclusion work and my work experience is really supporting my employees to build some of the competency, to build some of the skills to work better with the domestic diversity populations. So why it's important? I think from an academic standpoint, I think it's very important to have a campus or have an environment that support people that from international background and diverse background that are able to achieve their academic goals. I think that's what we offer higher education. It's really trying to provide the environment, facilitate the learning process, and help them achieve their personal goals. So I think that's a very important thing for us to provide that environment. And I think it's also important to think about, besides learning, we're also providing a social networking experience. So it's a cultural experience for people who either, understand or not understand the mainstream culture. So for myself, as an international student, when I came over here, it's a really eye-opening experience. So without this experience, I will not be able to really understand the culture here. So I think that's very important for us to really create that social environment for people to be safely explore the culture, and in return to provide their perspective to the people who live here. So I think that's something that I think is important. I think also, safety issues, and we all hope our students here be safe and be embraced in many ways. And I think also for extension, particularly interesting enough is that actually that's like an investment, because a lot of the international projects we're working on with Kenya and Morocco, a lot of them are U of M alumni. So if we provide them good experience, in the future, when they go back to their country, they did a great job and they achieved their personal goal. And in return, university and Minnesota actually would be benefit from their achievement. So that's just something I wanted to provide.
Thanks, Cain.
Shall we go in order? Thank you for being here, for coming here and reserving some of your time. So, as Anitra said, I am from Bogota, Colombia. And I identify as a Latin American, and I identify as a scholar from the Global South. So when I am interacting with my students at the Humphrey School, this is what I come with, right? Part of our work in teaching is in engaging in dialogue and in creating worlds and in shaping the world for the future, and that's done through dialogue. And of course, whatever you bring of yourself into that dialogue, that becomes it. So that's a main component for me. In what other ways do I intersect with these issues and with my students? Well, I teach international development, so the topic that I teach is all about international issues. Some of the students that I have are domestic students interested in international issues, and some of them are international students. Some of the students are international students who have a permanent residence. So we have now 3 categories of students here, right, that we're talking about. In my conversations and in the interactions that I have both formally and informally at the Humphrey School with students, and actually my own experience. I have been in the U.S. for 22 years. I was also an international student here at the University of Minnesota. The experience is that the U.S. is a very racialized country. So our conversations about diversity, which ought to include gender, religion, class, physical and cognitive ability, ethnic affiliation, and sexual orientation, often get relegated to race. So the term diversity often is a code word for race, and we do it in unconscious ways, and sometimes in conscious ways, and we do it verbally and we do it in written form. So in the words of a student, of an international student, she said recently that I sat in a few diversity committee meetings in the beginning and felt that even as they were all well-intentioned, I could not understand what they were aiming to do. I feel that people sometimes miss that color is not necessarily a classification for diversity. For example, brown people with privilege or wealth might be different from brown people without privilege and wealth. And people like their diversity delivered to them in bite-sized portions. So this is a student who has been here for less than a year. I think we also tend to begin to see the global world and globalization with a racial lens, right, with our American racial lens. And we tend to believe that the world sees itself with the same racial lens as we have here in the United States. So we begin to transfer that as if other people have the same lenses in the U.S. International students, when they first arrive to the U.S., are actually puzzled at the concept of students of color. And as time goes by, the idea begins to crystallize that, oh, the color of their skin is actually more important than the experiences that they bring in. It's more important that the country that they are in, that what they have in their brains. And of all of the other issues that form their identity. So this is when I begin saying that I am a Latin American scholar. I often emphasize I have a Latin American brain. Again, in the words of this student, I think people in the U.S. see me more as female, brown, South Asian, but they don't see me as my gender, plus my country, plus my color, plus my ethnic affiliation, plus my religion, plus my family experiences, plus all of the places in the world where I have lived, plus my individual personality traits. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to be participating in this conversation today. And to begin with the experience that I have with the topic, I would start by saying I consider myself to be international, and also consider myself to be very diverse. And with the work that I do with International Student and Scholar Services, I work with people who are also international and diverse. And I would say that maybe I would like to begin by explaining a little bit the population that I work with. International Student and Scholar Services, we work with students who are here on visas. They have been admitted to come to the United States to study at the University of Minnesota, and they have a particular document which is a visa purposely to study. Also, we work with scholars, and these are people also from outside of the U.S. They have visas that allow them to come in as to do research, to teach, or to do both. And so I'm thinking that the distinction between international and scholars and the people that I work with is important because sometimes it's confusing, and because at the university we have international domestic students. These are people who are here maybe because they came through their refugee status or through their asylum status, and sometimes it's confusing. And I think those are really important groups of people here as well, but I would like to say we do not, in my office, we don't really work with those. And there are reasons for that, not because we don't want to work with them. It's just because the work we do is very specific, and the students we have who are under the international who are under the visas, there are very many rules and regulations that really kind of control them or manage the way they're here at the university. And I would say I haven't worked very much with the domestic students, but through the programs that I do, we have domestic students participating in them. And one of them that is actually ongoing right now, actually two of them, is the cross-cultural discussion groups, which are conversation groups just like the one we are having here. And we have domestic students and international students participating in those. And also we have the International Buddy Program, which is a peer mentor program where current students who are at the University of Minnesota, both domestic and international, get paired with a new incoming international student, and they help them with the adaptation process. And I would say working with these populations is really important. And I think the topic today is very relevant for us as a university because we are growing in different ways. The number of international students who are coming in is getting higher, and also the domestic students who are coming to our university are also coming from different places and bringing different experiences, and there's need for us to be able to work together and be able to help one another, because as much as we are here, staff and the student, we have a common goal, but we come with differences as well as similarities. And sometimes when there are differences, there could be confusion. Sometimes some people are uncomfortable. Sometimes there's a lot of fear. There's assumptions and things like that. And I think that is why the topic of today is important. And the other thing I would like to share is in terms of why this topic is important, or why the populations, the international and domestic populations that we work with is important, is because I think the university's mission to be able to prepare our students and to graduate them to be effective citizens or global citizens cannot be done without the domestic students and the international students, and as a staff in both offices working together, because we cannot give these students the skills they need without really helping them out identify what those skills are. For example, they need intercultural skills, they need good communication skills, they need problem-solving skills, and many other skills that they need. But most of the time, students do not even have an idea. As a university, we are saying we want you to be in global citizens, but what does that mean? So we really have to tell them, and we have to give them structures in the classrooms, in the programs that we have outside of the classroom, so that they can be able to achieve those goals. So I think bringing domestic students and international students together, which I would say is something that we are struggling with, and there's a lot of message out there saying our domestic students and international students are not really working together, or they don't see each other's groups that should be working together. There is a separation. Sometimes there's a little bit of isolation, I would say, especially for international students who are coming here in an environment that is completely different for them. They don't know how to operate. They don't know how to interpret or translate things that are going on. And I would say being able to integrate these two groups is really helpful for all of them, for ourselves as staff who work with them. I think that is something that is really important. Thank you.
Hi. So I guess as the other panelists have been talking, I've been wondering about whether I'm an international student. I guess that, instantly, I guess I would say no, right? One, I have lived here since I was a toddler. I don't have any memories of living in Mexico. I have gone through the U.S. system. I've never took a day of school in Mexico. I would say that both English and Spanish are my first language. In a lot of ways, I consider myself American, but in a lot of other ways, I also consider myself Mexican. And in some ways, I consider myself both, or both and then neither. But then I'm wondering, well, maybe I am, right? And this all depends on sort of how you look at it, right? Interestingly, Greta has been in the U.S. for as long as I have, but I do not consider myself an international student. There are fundamental differences between my experience and Greta's experience, but there are some fundamental similarities as well. I consider myself to have Mexican brain. I don't know if it's completely Mexican, but it's there. Sometimes mostly when I'm angry, I will definitely only have a Mexican brain. When I'm trying to talk about the construction of race and gender and sexuality, it's definitely an American brain. And it's not even just an American brain, but a very particular American brain, one that has more education than both my parents combined. And so this question about whether you're an international student or not, I think is trickier than we might think. But also, I think that it's especially tricky for people who have had a presence on U.S. land for before it was the U.S., right? People of Mexican descent, people of indigenous descent were, I think, in a particular situation because we were here before it was America. And so what our status is as Americans and as foreigners is very complicated. And especially for people who have been immigrating here, who have immigrated here so not born here, but yet not necessarily have the same relationship to America as foreigners. I think that that's a very complicated, and I think the line between international and, because I think part of what the other panelists are saying is that there's a fundamentally different experience for international students, but I think that there is also shared experience with people of color, right? And that's that sense of alienation and not belonging to the U.S. and feeling like an outsider. And I think, speaking as a person of color who is not an international student but grew up here, I have also felt a complete sense of alienation and of not belonging. Even though this is Dakota land, I know plenty of Dakota people who do not feel like this is where they belong. And so I don't think that there is a sort of fundamental difference, right, between international and foreign, international and domestic students that can be clearly drawn. But also, I think that there are important differences, right? Especially for Latinos, right? Because I'm a Latino person, but I know that again, sorry to pick on you, Greta, but my experience is very different than Greta's. And also, I have a friend who's Colombian, not Greta, but I have another friend who's also from Bogota and is Colombian. We would sit around and talk because he very fiercely identifies as a Latino person, but I remember being shocked when I saw him because, I think that if he hadn't identified himself as Latino, I never would have identified him as such, but also because he starts telling me about his family. His family, right? They own a condo in downtown Medellin. He has multiple cars. He flies back to Medellin whenever he wants. He went to one of the best schools in Colombia. My parents went to 3rd and 4th grade, respectively. I went to a suburban school, luckily, in Minneapolis, but lived in a trailer for most of my life. I right now, as a graduate student, make more money than my dad did while I was growing up, and he supported a family of 6. I cannot fly to see. I've been in Mexico, once in the last 5 years for financial reasons. He goes to Colombia and to Europe on 3-4 times a year. So to say that there are no differences is also a misconception, because I did not go to one of the top schools or universities. Sorry, U of M. Of the U.S. I simply didn't, and the privileges that he has had, or my friend from China, whose parents are doctors, have a very different experience than I do. My father, takes the guts out of chickens for 8 hours every day in rural Oklahoma. So I just wanted to bring up some of those nuances to think about. And then, sorry to talk well, but I also have a lot of experience working with international students as a professor. Instructor, and as a graduate consultant for the Writing Center, and teaching to students who are, I would say, the majority are from Asia. It's been interesting to think about the ways in which they've also been brought to the U.S. and are also oppressed here and taken advantage of by the university to fill quote unquote diversity standards. So I guess I can talk about those more.
Thanks. Actually, I appreciate everyone bringing up some of these nuances, because that's where the next 2 questions, I considered smashing them together, but we'll do them separately. The first question is, what do you see as some of those tensions or differences between international and domestic populations, and or the efforts to work on behalf of both of those populations within higher ed? So where are some of those tension points or challenges?
All right. Extension is University of Minnesota's outreach arm, so we don't usually dealing with the traditional sense of students for credits. Mm-hmm. But we do bring a lot of research-based information and educational program to communities. So we do work with both international population and domestic population. I think myself is also kind of in a different, if you want to say as a nuances, kind of a position is I have an international background, but now I'm settled here, started being more domestic, more kind of turning into some of the dynamics locally. So I think that some of the tensions, at least I'm experiencing, I see, is first of all, I think go back to the previous panels talking about people of color, this term. We really that usually, mention the people that who with minority and have darker skin than white. For me, is I really have a trouble with that. First of all, you just really using your skin to categorize you. And also what that means is that you use one kind of skin categorize many different populations. So I think that's the tension. One tension that I observe is that if you say Asian, in Minnesota particularly, you can see many, many different groups to belong to that people of color Asian group. So that is really covered many unique characteristics and unique needs of a different groups. So I think the tensions really come from that. You don't identify me as a unique person instead of you lump me into a group. That could be international lump with domestic. And that's totally not on target to trying to solve a problem or trying to facilitate the growth or have a constructive dialogue. So I think this is one of the tension I perceive. And other things I perceive in my experience is also that even within the so quote-unquote people of color, so people that with less population in Minnesota, they also have that sense of unknown and threat when they facing international people. Because when people are afraid of unknown, afraid of change, your own domestic dynamics, you kind of grow into it and what exactly is going on. But when you have originally from two groups, white versus people who domestically with less population, suddenly add on another group as the international group, and then the international group, of course, is multiple different groups lumped together. And suddenly the threats just come up. I don't really know how to work with this group, and I much rather to work with my old enemies, in some way to figure out this problem. So that tension is between newcomers versus people who are already here for generations. So that's something that I observe as well. And obviously, when I was an international student, I'm just lucky that I was in a program that international student was actually predominantly the population. So sometimes you will hear the domestic students say, oh, we are become a stepchild because then the professors really not paying attention to people who grow up here because the international student just much more popular and get more attention and resources from the faculty and staff. So I think that's another piece of tension that we're dealing with is that, the perception of sharing resources, attention, and policy and focus. So that's some of the tensions I observed in my previous experience. Thanks.
So I'm having trouble differentiating which are the tensions that we generate by our practices and then which are the tensions that are out there by students' interactions. So I'll begin with the first one. What type of tensions do we generate by the practice? So I was invited, or maybe I just signed up for it, to participate in a workshop, and I really love teaching, so I take some of the workshops that the Center for Teaching and Learning offers, and it was geared towards faculty of color and international faculty. And and it was to address diversity issues or issues of color. And I found the putting of the two issues together and of the two populations problematic. And maybe, yes, that's me, so I'll address some of what Jesus mentioned. So, yes, issues of class intersect with issues of race and of color, right? So, in Colombia, I'm not upper class, so I'm not necessarily perceived as white. To me, it was a surprise when I arrived to this country that actually I became white here. And of course, the more time that I spend in the U.S. and the more clothing that I buy from LL Bean, the more I merge, right, with the way that we dress and the way, so the more that I pass until I open up my mouth. And then people get surprised, right? No, you can't be from Colombia because, and there are the issues, there's where it intersects with class. If you are not undocumented, if you have education, if you have white skin, you cannot be from Colombia, right? So that's where, again, I begin to emphasize I have a Latin American brain. But of course, because the U.S. is so racialized, my experience is very different. I don't know. I can't speak. And I haven't had this conversation with a faculty member from Japan or with a faculty member from South Africa. But would they feel the experience different from me, right? I would imagine so. How is that? Would they feel it different with their students, with their international students, with their domestic students? So those are some of the tensions that I think we generate. So I put it in terms of faculty because I feel that. Are we generating those tensions when we are creating events for students, where we're inviting students, let's say a diversity event, and specifically we're targeting international students and domestic students of color under the same banner? So if we think about our invitation for today, our panel for today is called Who Counts as What? Promise and Tensions of International and Domestic Diversity. So given what I said before of how diversity is code word for color, right, then what does that mean of how we are already imagining diversity and how that takes place in other countries? So yes, for Colombia, of course, race is very important, but so is class. If we think of South Asia, caste and class and religion are very important. Probably the most important. I'm not a South Asian specialist, but having read about it, I would imagine that that's what it is. So I want us to keep that in mind somewhat. Now, what are the students necessarily feeling that there are tensions? I think that there is a misperception by domestic students of color, minority students, that international students take away their possibilities for financial aid. And what I understand, specifically, I cannot speak about the university. What I understand that we do at the Humphrey, and again, I'm not a legal representative for what the Humphrey is doing. This is just my understanding of what we do. Is that we when students are filling out their information to get into the school, they actually say whether they are domestic born, and they can tick if they want to the race category, right, or not. They can say whether they are foreigners also, and they can say if they have domestic residence, but not born within the U.S. So for federal aid, the students who are considered for federal aid are both those who have citizenship and permanent residence. And there are specific scholarships that apply to those groups and that are targeted to students of color, and that would be the Dove Scholarship, for instance. But other than that, there isn't a lot of competition. That's my understanding. So there is a misperception out there, and I wonder if that misperception is in how we label events. So that's something for us to keep in mind. I would like to finish this section by something that was said to me by a student. So 2 points. One that is part of this perception. In a way, I feel that the university as a whole ignores the problem with access to education of diverse domestic students and avoids being penalized for lack of diversity by recruiting international students. So these are some of the perceptions that we have out there. And then on the other hand, there are no tensions or little tension, then the student says, other than that, I have not found other points of contention between minority domestic students and international students. I think other than the confusion that exists in lumping both groups together, we understand our differences and come to common ground much more easily than with our white colleagues.
Thank you. So just like my colleagues here have shared about the tension, when I read this question the first time, I remember thinking, tension is a very, very strong word. And I was trying to think about any experience that I've heard or something that is happening at the university that I should be aware of, especially coming from the International Student and Scholar Services Office. And I actually talked to a few of my colleagues, and I was wondering, do you know of something that is going on? Because I felt like there was something actually happening. It was definitely a statement that, to me, made me think maybe there's something going on. But thinking about it some more, I would say maybe not using the word tension, I would say maybe conflict. I would think when a group of people come together, and these are people who have different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking, they look different, they behave differently, certainly there's going to be some maybe conflict. And here at the university, just like my colleagues here have shared, that we have a lot of categories for the different groups of people that are here. It could be, like for our office, International Student and Scholar Services, and I was saying we do not work with the immigrant population. The question might be, well, the international, how come you don't? And also we have the Office of Equity and Diversity that works with another group. And all different offices have the specific group of people that they work with. So there's a lot of categories, and sometimes it might be very hard for someone who is here as a student not knowing where to go when they have a problem, because they don't know if they really fit to go there or not. Because I don't think in the university we really have all these descriptions or information that really helps students understand what is going on, because of maybe the way we make our policies and also the practices. And I would think the other reason that there could be tension has to do with there's a lot of fear. I remember when I came to the University of Minnesota for the first time, and having had a very good interaction with the center abroad students that I worked with in Kenya, and these are all American students. I worked with them for 3 years, and the relationship was great. We talked a lot. I thought I knew a lot about America before coming, so when I got admitted to the university, I actually did not do much research on what to expect, even the weather. I know I saw pictures from the students. And so when I got here, things were really different. And it was very disappointing because I felt I can read English, I can write. I've been speaking in English for a very long time. I've had Americans, I've interacted with them, I can speak with them, they can understand me, I can understand them. And when I got here, my English was completely the wrong English. And the way I was reacting to things was really, really different. And then in the classes I was taking, we were talking a lot about race. I was in the counseling program, so we talked about how to do counseling for different groups of the diverse groups that we have here in America. And I kept thinking, why do we have to separate them? They are all human beings, and we can counsel them the same way because they're going through the same problems. But I was meant to understand, no, there are actually differences. And also I realized I'm also supposed to be identifying myself as black, which I never did before. And so I was really, really conscious of my color And anytime I spoke, I was expecting someone not to understand me, so I was already nervous, even going to the coffee shop to order maybe a cup of coffee. I was afraid of how to say it. And to me, I would say that experience made me lose my self-esteem to some extent, and also be cautious around people because I thought they were judging me, or they were not going to pay interest on what I'm going to say. So I can say for international students or students who are here not feeling like they fit or something is wrong with them because of the way they identify, that could be a point of tension. And with the cross-cultural discussion groups that I coordinate, and I've been doing the discussions with, I would say about 13 groups now, and we have a lot of discussions around identity and how to identify yourself. And most of the international students say, I have no idea how to do that. I've never had to do it. No one has taught me to think about myself differently. And then the U.S. students in the group will say, well, I guess you might have to learn how to do it because that is something that you have to experience here in the university at every moment. And we'll be asking, where do you come from? Or you have an accent. Where do you come from? Which part of Europe, which part of Africa do you come from? So I think all these things all these interactions make you feel like something is not right because you always have to describe yourself to someone else. You always have to ask things maybe more than one time. And I can see that could be a point of tension really because the university admitted me here. I qualify to be here. I have the right documents to be here. How come I have to explain myself more than once to be able to get the services that I need? Or why do I feel like I'm making a mistake every minute? And these are especially students who are here as new students. That's why maybe the domestic students also might not know how to interact with them because if you're meeting someone who is really nervous around you, I don't know how you're going to proceed because what I've heard from the domestic students, they say it's really encouraging the national students saying, your English is really good. You should feel free talking to people like, no, you say that because you're in this group with me, but outside there, they are not going to receive me the way you're receiving me. So I would say there's a lot of fear with making mistakes. And also something else I was thinking, the tension also, and I would say this is from, I would say ourselves as staff at the university, the students, we all have to learn how to deal with differences. And talking from an international student viewpoint, especially for undergraduate students, they come here at the age of sometimes 17, sometimes 18, and they came straight from high schools where all they did was study every day, some of them from 7 to 11 p.m., as I've been told. They did not get the chance to learn social skills, and especially skills to relate to people who look different, speak different, and do things differently than they are. So I think that is another point that really makes the international students struggle. And like Ying was saying, students may tend to just be in the groups of students who are coming from their own countries. They look for people who are similar to them because they need that support. Because the host culture, the domestic students, and maybe the staff sometimes, there's a lot of things going on. They don't have the time for them. So they are going to look for people who come from the same country as them so that they can use their mother tongue, so that they can just talk about what is going on with them. And when maybe domestic students see a group of Chinese students speaking in Chinese, they are not going to try and make contact with them. Because most of the times, domestic students don't speak Chinese, so to them, they're not really going to fit. So I think these are all those things that could really bring a lot of tension, and I think for us as staff at the university, it's our job to help these students be able to learn these skills, especially when they're really new here. And I'm not saying the domestic students are also equipped with the skills because they're also young, and they're finding their way as well. So I think we need to have structures and programs and ways that we can help students be able to build these skills that they really need, especially social skills. Thank you.
So, Grace, I just want to let you know that no matter how long you'll be here or how long I've been here, I still get asked the question, "Where are you from?" The thing that changes is what comes after you say, "I'm from, Bloomington," and they'll be like, "Oh, no, where are you really from?" So I just wanted to prepare you for that, because no matter, even if your accent goes away or all that, you're still going to get that question. So just letting you know. So I guess I was thinking about a lot about my experiences, and I guess I was wondering also about being an instructor too, and a consultant, which is not the same as an instructor, but I do a lot of teaching, I guess, when I help people write individually, one-on-one. And I guess I always wonder what students, and especially international students, come and talk to me. The first thing they usually say is, "What's your name?" And they're like, "Jesus?" And I'm like, "No," but I was like, "But I can see why you would make that assumption, and it's fine. And let me give you a little bit of history, one-on-one, really quick, about why my name is that, and why I'm living here, and why my name is like that." But it's sort of, I guess that makes it easier for me to botch their names. I guess, and that, because then we'll both be embarrassed. And so I'm wondering, sort of, what assumptions they make, or what they see when they see a brown face, right? Or if they even see a brown face, right? Because I've traveled to South Africa, and there I was white for the first time in my life, and I was like, "Oh wow, what's this?" So yeah, so I guess I think a lot about that too, because I teach in writing, right? And writing is synonymous with English, and English is synonymous with white, and I'm brown, and what that means for not only my international students, which I've had, but also my domestic students, both students of color and white, right? They're like, "Oh, look, there's this guy who is speaking, or who's going to teach me to write. He's sort of what's going to give me, the go-ahead to be like a writer at the university," right? And he not only, looks to be my age, but also is brown, and what that means. And then there's also the fact that I come out as queer, and that I come out as poor, and that, that sort of changes their perceptions of me, but also how that makes my approach to international students different as well. I guess I have a lot of, and domestic students, right? I think that I put a lot of effort into my relationships and the success of my international and domestic students as a form of equity. And so I wonder how other students perceive that as well. But in terms of tensions, I think that for me, I've always been able to sort of empathize more with domestic students of color and international students of color and otherwise. And so I don't know what sort of tensions that may bring up in other students, but I think that most of my students of color, international students of color, well, I can't generalize, but I think that they are able to see something in me, right? Just because if you can see yourself reflected in something that you're looking forward to, that's an important gesture in and of itself. You're seeing someone teach a class who has the same skin color as you. That in and of itself is a very symbolic gesture. I remember reading my first book by a woman of color and thinking, hey, her name is, like my aunt's name. That's crazy. Her name isn't Jane. And that was important for me. So I think that although there may be some tensions, I think there are also some benefits too. But I think that another thing is it also depends on, we're sort of talking about people of color and international students of color in these very broad categories, but I think it depends on where you are from, right, or what you're perceived to be from, and also where you teach, right, because as a Chicano, if I teach Chicano studies, it's very different than if I were to teach Mexican art history, right, because my being Mexican would give you some sort of authenticity or validity in a Mexican art history course. It might sort of provide some challenges or maybe even some more critiques, right, since I'm teaching a writing class. But also, right, what kind of minority I am in that, and how that frames the discussion and the tensions between people, and what minority or origin other people are from. And then, I don't know, I kind of, although I do see, I just mentioned that there might be some sort of generalization by just sort of putting these people into broad categories. I think that there is some sort of benefit, right? Because I think that as people of color, both international students or not, like, whether you want to or not, you're going to be put into specific categories, right? Like Grace mentioned, right? She never identified as black before coming to the U.S., but she's being put into that category. And so whether she likes it or not, she's going to be subjected to the same forms of oppression as people of color, as black people here in the U.S. And so whether she wants to or not, she has to face that oppression. And so I think uniting behind that level of oppression and out of a very specific system of power, I think that there needs to be some recognition that we are being subjected to some similar sort of thing, and that we need to, bond behind that. So I don't think that, I'm sorry, Yang, that I think it's completely useless, or not that you said that, but I think that there are some benefits behind that sort of, what is that word that I'm trying to use? Banding behind that term, right?
In the interest of time, because we do want to leave some time with for the audience to ask questions and do a little discussion, I just want to, we might skip a little bit of the third question and move to the last question. And just so the audience knows, the third question was about, what are the overlaps between sort of this idea of a globally engaged campus and then equity and diversity, these sort of categories that the panelists have been talking about, and where are the overlaps. And some of the panelists have kind of touched on that, particularly Jesus, I think, has done a great job of saying, hey, we experience, domestic students of color experience some of the same things that international students experience, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sorry to leave it out, because I think it's a really important point to not just talk about the tensions or the challenges, but to talk about some of these sort of common struggles. So, but the last question is about what are some opportunities to kind of reframe this conversation as, maybe not having broad categories, or I thought Jesus brought up a good point of, what does international mean, and sharing his experience. So what are some ways or opportunities that the panelists see as ways to reframe this that is mutually beneficial to both of the populations that we've been talking about?
Okay, I had to put this joke out there. Grace, you're lucky that you get pre-warning about the weather. Before I came here, I didn't do my research, which I learned my life lesson number one. I came here without preparing for the winter. So, yes, that was my reaction to it. So, talking about what are some opportunities, I think it's really good that we can combine the question we skip and with this question. So I think, really building a globally engaging campus, and really we need to address the equity and diversity issues. I think, the opportunity I see here is that no matter whether you are from international background or domestic, or mix two of them together, I think the equity and diversity issue all need to be handled. It may handle in a different context, because you are from international, you may facing a little bit different, diversity and equity issues than the people who grow up here, or they grow up here marginalized by the main culture. So I think that's the opportunity for us to look at. We have an overall goal we want to achieve to building this engaging university. Really, the goal is to facilitate, successful education, and really help our students to be a very, a successful citizen for their own country or this country. So we need to address that equity and diversity issue no matter what. But I think the context is very important. So I think the skill set, though, in some way that could be transferred from one context to the other. So that, I think the opportunity is really looking at what will be the common goal we want to achieve in a different context? What kind of common skills we're looking at we can build among us? And then also understand that experience could build on each other. So we have some international projects going on in extension. And one question is raised by our educators is that why are we going to international, not focus on domestic? Are we done with the domestic education or domestic building yet? We're not done yet. yet why we moved on into international. But I think our response is that, your international experience may help you actually build some of the skills, your understanding, so then you can bring them back to domestic programming, so help you be more successful. Sometimes starting from international does not mean that you abandon the other side. Sometimes it just could be an easier or just the right time doing the right thing. And that experience will help you build the skills, the communication skills, how to deal with conflicts, how to deal with difference, to bring them back to domestic. So I think those are opportunities to help us reframe this discussion. It's not either or, it's really and. And how can we, including this and that, with the understanding that you do have a dialogue based on different contexts. I know people hate the question, the answer, say, oh, it depends. But it does depend. So where you are talking, who you are talking, how you're talking, it's a really, require different, I think require certain skill set and then understanding of a broader context. So. Thanks.
So I think we need to, several things. One, we need to have more clarity, develop more clarity with ourselves, and we need to be more clear with the message. When we are saying people of color, do we mean people born in the U.S. who are not white? Or do we mean anybody who is not white, regardless of where they were born? And then there's the third category, which both Jesus and I introduced, and that is, or maybe it is people who were not born in the U.S. but have been here for a long time who are not white. And how do people identify, right? Because one thing is, how do we make that survey box to tick? And then how are people identifying themselves? I think we need to make an effort to recruit and retain students from communities who have been historically marginalized in the United States. That we must do. So we need to recruit more African Americans. We need to recruit more Chicanos. We need to recruit more Latinos. That's a must. More Asians. Who have been here for a long time. I think that's a must. We should make every effort to address inequality based on class, based on economic opportunity, based on sex, based on gender, based on ability. And maybe part of doing that is also, maybe we should rethink the concept of diversity. How do we define diversity? And maybe that's just not a good word. Maybe we should think about social justice as replacing the word diversity. Because when we have a concept of social justice, then you can begin to have more nuance. Diversity has become too, it's code word, and it's lost its meaning. We also need to educate our population here in the U.S., our domestic population and our student population that is domestic, on international issues. So, of course, the challenges that Ecuador has of class are different from the challenges that Zimbabwe has of class. And yet, when we use the term global, I mean, this becomes a great bowling ball, right, that trumps everything, right? We're globalizing. But what exactly does that mean? So we need to have nuanced understandings of the contexts of each country. And what that means is that when a graduate student or an undergraduate student encounters an international student, whether they've been here for 6 months or for 5 years, they will be able to have conversations that are more nuanced and, as one of my students said, that will not represent the super white, right? So the super white is the person who cannot pronounce the name, or the professor, in fact, and who says, let let me please call you Nelson instead, because I just can't pronounce your name.
Oh.
And this has happened. So, so I think that's really important. And we need to, in order, I'll ratify my first point that we need to make every effort to recruit minority students that are domestic. We need to have more financial aid for those students. We need to have financial aid for students who come from socioeconomic backgrounds that are not, that haven't been represented. And without financial aid, it's hard, right? So.
With the question about the opportunities that we have in reframing the conversation, I would say my office in International Student and Scholar Services and Office of Equity and Diversity and all the other departments and programs that are working towards helping international students or all the students here at the university to achieve the goal that brought them here. I think we are in a really unique place. We are placed in a way that we are able to, for us, especially the International Student Scholar Services, we have the international students and we serve them and they know us. When they come here, we are the first office that they have contact with. So I think we have the opportunity to be able to work with the international students as well as able to work with the Office of Equity and Diversity in coming up with programs that can bring these two groups together. And also, I know there's a lot of work already that is going on within the department, and even thinking back to the conference that we had last week, Internationalization of Campus and Curriculum, one of the sessions I attended was presented by Barbara Kapler, who is the Dean and Director of International Student and Scholar Services, and Ann Phibbs, and I remember there was someone else from, I think, Duluth campus. I think that really, to me, was a testament of how beautiful we can work together and be able to come up with frameworks that can help us be able to do this work together and in an easier way, because it seems really complicated because with the domestic students, we are dealing with a lot of students and a lot of factors within the diversity. And also our international students have their own diversity. And I know when international students come to the U.S., or even to the university here, we put them in the category of students who are international, but we really do not know much about where they're coming from. They could be coming from places where they're minorities themselves. They could be coming from places where class is a big issue for them. They could be coming from places where really they are marginalized. And I can give an example with myself. I'm here. When I came to the University of Minnesota, I remember thinking, I can't believe it actually happened, because I come from a family that could not have afforded to bring me to the U.S., but for some reason I was able to. And a lot of the support came from my community. There was a big fundraising, and everyone was pulling together for me to come to the U.S., and that happened. But I don't come from a rich family. And I would say I don't think I've actually talked about it here in the U.S., and I imagine if I grew up in America, I might have been categorized maybe with the minority or maybe the lower class. And so I would say there is a lot going on with the international students just as the domestic students. And the issues that they're going through, I know they might be different, but actually they're important to them. And I think the opportunity that we can see as the staff and the faculty and everyone who is involved in working with these students is to see that there are similarities, there are differences, but actually we can share resources. We don't even have to replicate them. We can have programs that these two groups can actually come together and be able to enjoy them and be able to learn from each other. And I think we have, as the offices and as the professionals in the field, we have to be role models for these students. If they see the different offices working together without, and I'm saying working together, I don't mean merging the offices, I mean creating programs that we can share with each other. We can collaborate. We can bring speakers. We can create programs where students can come in and learn about, especially for international students, learn about American history. some things that I've heard from the students that I've worked with, most of the times they say, I have no idea how to talk about race. The only thing I know about race from maybe watching movies and all, and I'm afraid about, to even, some of them will give an example of how they don't know how to interact with African Americans because all they've seen is movies where there's a lot of shooting and they imagine someone might be carrying a gun. And to them, it's just, that is all they know. They don't know African Americans are actually educated people. They are here on campus. They are doing amazing things in the world. And it's really hard as an international student, someone who is preparing to go to another country, to be able to really know that other than from just watching movies and maybe listening to the stories. And most of the times, the stories that are out there in the media or maybe what friends share, sometimes are really exaggerated. It's not the truth. So I think we have to deal with the stereotypes. We have to help students be able to really think about what is going on and know that there are those stories that are out there, but also there's the reality. So my office and all the other offices that are working with these students, I think we're in a place where we can make these things happen. And one last thing I wanted to share is I think also we need to reach out to the community outside of the university because there's also, I would say, our community most probably doesn't know who the international students are. Also, they don't have any experience with interacting with someone from another country, most probably. And again, to deal with the tension that could be there, the community needs to hear about what is going on for the University of Minnesota in terms of the student population that they have. I feel like it's a good idea to tell some stories about international students just as well as domestic students. Have sessions where the community is able to come and see what is going on so that all those assumptions they have, for example, about maybe the university is having a lot of international students and so they are taking away the resources for our domestic students or for the citizen of the country. That is something that can be used if there's a program where the community really gets to know what is going on. And because I think it's not just us here on campus, the community matters us a lot because students are renting accommodation from them. They're going to the grocery stores. They're using the buses. And most of the times, it becomes a little bit difficult for the students to interact with the community because there are all those fears again. So I think we really have to do a lot of programming. We have to do a lot of teaching. We have to teach a lot of intercultural skills as well as social skills and to do away with all the assumptions, the stereotypes that we come in when we are meeting people that we really do not know. Thank you.
So I'm just going to keep it brief, I guess, so that we can go, that we can switch over. So I just think, again, that I guess we just need to really recognize and make clear the sort of differences and similarities that we have between these two groups. But I really think that it's important that because we sort of both of our groups, right, we provide diversity, right, for the university, but I think that there's still a fundamental sort of difference between the experience growing up in the U.S. And as a minority and being molded, right, by the experiences as a person of color in the U.S. That need to be remedied, right? And one of the remedies has been through access to higher education, right? And sort of so one of the ways in which which diversity has been coded is sort of like social justice or equity, right? And so, but as we know, underneath that umbrella term, diversity, it's not just people who have been raised in the U.S., right? And I'm not trying to say that international students don't have their own experiences with oppression here and in the U.S., but I think that, affirmative action was directly meant to sort of address inequality for students in the U.S. And so if we're both being put underneath this umbrella term, I think that that's a problem because it's not really being true to what, right? So when the University of Minnesota claims diversity for I don't know how many students, but if that large percentage of students is made up from students who didn't grow up here and didn't have to, go to a segregated school, didn't have to go to, be called a spick on a regular basis, et cetera. Like that's not that I don't think that that's fair on behalf of the university. So so here I guess I'm switching the focus to the university rather than to us, and I think that as long as that difference is, understood or at least reframed, I think that's a great step forward. But I've seen a lot of international students fall from the cracks, right? Like they take the TOEFL, and they're like, great, I'm good to go. I can, take a class at the University of Minnesota, and as my writing consultant position has showed me, that is absolutely not the case. A lot of students fall behind. A lot of international students do, especially if they don't come from countries where English is taught at an extensive level, or if they haven't been previously colonized by like a European country. But so that needs to be addressed, right? But also there are a lot of students of color falling from the cracks, and so, a lot of them, right? I think the university has less than like 500 Latino students. And those are, I don't really even know if those are minority students or international students or both. But I just think both need to be addressed. I don't think that it's an either or question here.
Thanks. Well, can everyone join me in giving our panelists a round of applause? And Anne is going to grab the mic, and so if you have questions or comments, we'll ask you to speak into the mic.
Thank you. My name is Matt Cain. I just wanted to jump off of sort of my perception and what Jesus was raising. It's the way I kind of look at this issue. I think it's a good idea. It's more of a university perspective or a white perspective that this problem comes from. But from that white population view, not to frame the panel that way, but I find that people are often more comfortable with the international than they are with if you are African American or you're Latino. And so I do have the kind of reaction that Jesus was pointing to, where it's, okay, if we have populations here in this country that do not have access and face the kind of reactions that you pointed out, Grace, where not only do the white people think if you're African American you must be carrying a gun, but the international students think it too, that just points to some real issues for me. And so I don't want to be trying to create tensions, but I was a little surprised when I came into the room at what the panel was, really, honestly. And so I'll just toss that out and just say, I don't know if that's my baggage or my insight or what it is, but that's kind of how I view that. Is I feel like again, it's less about the international students. I think they're very valuable, but I don't see the white population or the university as an institution really making the gains it needs to with Minnesotans of color and American Indian students.
Thank you.
I want to just follow up with that. In my community, there is a person who says we have international students, we're diverse enough. Why are we doing all this other work? So I never thought of it that way.
I'm sorry, can you speak a little bit more into the mic? Yeah.
We have enough international students. Why do we have to do more work to really cultivate our understanding of diversity and care about local students, marginalized Americans? And I just want to thank you for this rich conversation, because I have been writing myself notes about how to have this dialogue about how, there's so many differences within each group, and do our international students know how to deal with differences, and how are they marginalized? And sort of, we talk about doorways and entrances to dialogues. That could be an entrance to a dialogue. I mean, I'm not out to change this person's mind, but I care about these issues. So I just want to say that thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, sure.
Does this work? Okay. Yeah, and so I guess I have been walking on eggshells a little bit about this, because I think a lot of the times when because I do have a lot of issues with that exact same framing, right? We're diverse enough, and that diversity comes from international students, because a lot of that time I have been sort of like, I feel like people's heads are going like, is he xenophobic, right? Or there's just like, right, why is he so against international students? And I'm like, no. I am not against international students. I'm against sort of them, the sort of university policies and structures framing that as diversity as such, because especially, right, because diversity gets coded for people of color, right, coded as affirmative action, coded as social justice. But it's not, right, because affirmative action has a very specific history, which is supposed it's a very specific, and I'm not just talking about affirmative action in general, but like all sorts of a form of social justice, right, that are supposed to be like anti-racist. Those are meant to sort of combat a very specific history of oppression. And when that gets used to do something else, then we're sort of beating around the bush and getting around it, right? And that in and of itself becomes a further form of oppression, because people, these numbers are getting sort of thrown around as if they were actually doing something, but they're not. At least not to the people that they were supposed to do. So it's not, and I think that, you know, it's almost beneficial to sort of pit international students against students of color, right? I think that that's beneficial for these sorts of ways of thinking about it. And that's why I think coalition is so important, right? But I think that there is a fundamental difference, and it needs to be paid attention to, right? Because, again, I met a Spanish student. I was working at a coffee shop, right, sweeping, and he was Spanish, and he, you know, saw my name and tag, and he talked to me, and he was like, "Oh, I'm on a scholarship for diversity," and I was at McAllister, and I was like, and here I am. And this is not everyone's experience. I understand that. I actually just had a student coming in to consult with me on a paper who's basically talking about international students not all being rich and how that's a very common misconception. But here I was, right? He was on a diversity scholarship for McAllister College, and here I was sweeping the ground at Caribou Coffee downtown, right? And so we got into a conversation, and he said, "Yeah, it's because I'm Hispanic." And I just sort of was like, oh, I guess I'm just like, I was just like, oh yeah, well I guess you are, right? Because, you know, you speak Spanish and you technically come from a Spanish speaking country, and that's can get coded. But here you are, right? The country that took all of, you know, enough gold from Latin America to literally be able to create a bridge from, you know, South America to Europe, and you're getting the scholarship for diversity when you're technically white. I was just dumbfounded because I got a $4,000 scholarship from the university. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks. Yeah.
I would like to add on that. My name is Chewy. I was an international student who just got hired 2 months ago. I was really hesitant to check that Asian box, because I think that there's a major flaw in affirmative action goals right now. And I think that institutions need to take initiative to further define who exactly are we trying to protect. Because when I check the Asian box, I'm fulfilling the utilization, but I feel like maybe this is not, I don't want to like I don't want to make them feel like they've achieved AA because of hiring me, because I feel like that way I'm taking away access of opportunity for domestic Asians, and I feel really bad that checking that box. So yeah.
Thanks. Greta?
I'll just quickly respond to that. So in part, the language of the university to internationalize, and by mixing and internationalizing with diversifying, you were mixing two different goals that should not be mixed. One is righting the wrongs of American communities who have had social injustice done to them for a very long time, African Americans, Native Americans, and on. And then the other goal is to internationalize. But in the language, we're keeping the language together, and that we're mixing the goals, and that's that issue. So your point is a great one. What's our goals? And those are two separate goals. So how do we carry out each one?
Were there other, I'm sorry, hold on for a second. Were there other, did I see a hand or my, no. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Oh, no, there, sorry. And then I'll let you go, Grace.
Yeah, so from, what you guys said, actually I thought it was really enriching, especially for people who don't know about what international students face and what domestic students who happen to be from an international ethnic background face. I think there should be some awareness spread for, throughout all those different subcategories. Because, a person who's American might not know what an international student is facing. And an international student might not really know what life is all about here in America. I'm saying this as an international student on an F1 visa. So that's just primarily to study here. So sometimes I think that, that clarity you mentioned can be spread by awareness. And, sharing full experiences, not just a 2-minute, 3-minute window of okay, I'm from so-and-so, don't worry, nothing's going to happen to you, I'm, 100% safe. Quality check was done by the, Homeland Security and Immigration, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grace, do you want to finish us up?
I wanted to share something that I kind of struggle with a little bit, and I think someone talked about, from the audience mentioned that in regard to this topic of domestic diversity or thinking about the different minority groups there are in the United States and how the white America or our Caucasian staff or students and how maybe they're not doing as much as they should be doing in helping with the conversation. I've always been intrigued by times when I've been in sessions where it's talking about race or microaggression or diversity and minority groups, and the sessions are really quiet. And to me, I would say for sure, if it's the staff or the people that are running the program, usually if there's a person of color there, they're really talkative and they talk a lot and they share a lot and things that come up. But when it comes to the other side, there's a lot of quiet and it's just a lot of nodding. And to me, I've actually talked to some people because I've thought, it seems like this is a really hard topic to talk about. And I would say I actually expect a little bit more from, I would say the Americans themselves, because this is their topic. Coming as an international student, I want to learn and I want to be able to talk about it. But it seems really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I would say for the people of color that I've met, there is a lot of talk. But I would say for the Caucasian counterparts, it's not the same. And I'm just wondering, is there a way that this topic can be made easier for people? And I listen to a lot of comedians. Chris Rock is one of them. He's an African American. And a few other people. And there is a lot of fun talking about race and gender and religion and, all these stereotypes through comedy. And people laugh about it. Or everyone who is in the audience laugh about it. And it seems maybe there isn't much going on, but at least it's lighter. And I'm just wondering, at the university, is there a way we can make this conversation a little bit easier for people? So that, and I know it's not an easy topic. I know there's a lot of history with it. There's a lot of pain that comes with that. But I hope, and I've talked to some people, I think I've been told it's because some people feel a lot of guilt with a topic, they don't know how to come in, and they don't, again, fearing to make mistakes. And I know it's complicated, but I'm just wondering, is there a way we can make the topic easier? And is there a way people can be okay making mistakes maybe and moving forward from there, or people not feeling guilty? Because I know we all make mistakes, and I know this is not a topic where we can say sorry for what happened and we forget about it, but at least I feel like it's too heavy of a topic, and it's very, the discussions to me, I feel people are really uncomfortable, and I don't know if people have experience with that.
Just a quick just 1 second. I don't want to hold everyone up on a Friday afternoon, but I just wanted to kind of build on what Grace said. Is I do think this issue needs a shared responsibilities from minority community or international student community, and, we talk about white communities too. I think it's not we're trying to pointing fingers to each other, say, this is your cause. That I think solution need to be a shared responsibilities. So I do agree with Matt's observation. I mean, the panel is here kind of showing a little bit, bias towards we have things that are offered to the main culture, and the culture have to come in, the white people have to come in to listen to our story. Even within the white population, they has a lot of difference as well, class, education level, all those things as well. I think that is a shared responsibility to really come together to have this dialogue. And maybe we will come to that understanding, then it's easier for us to address this issue and start this dialogue. So so that's why sometimes I'm hesitate to be on panel, because people look at you and say, oh, you wanted to tell us something. So that's just not the way I want to perceive. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're out of time, so thank you all for being here, and to our panelists for taking the time to share their thoughts and experiences. So if you haven't signed in the back, please do so that we can send you an evaluation. We really value your feedback. And I think there's more cookies, so someone should probably eat those. So thank you.